That's new. Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to welcome Floyd Strayer today. We are going to be talking about a tough subject, and that is um, losing people to suicide. And what can survivors of suicide loss, how do we heal from that? How do we process that? It's a complicated grief. It's a tough one. And I'm just so grateful that Floyd Strayer is here. He's a facilitator over at Survivors of Suicide Loss, San Diego, which I am also on the board. I have a great respect for this organization and really believe what they're doing. So anyway, Floyd Strayer is retired from the Marine Corps with 21 years on active duty and has the past 22 years supporting sailors and Marines around the world with engineering technical services as a Navy civilian. This support took him to Iraq 3 times and to Afghanistan to train Marines. Floyd lost his brother to suicide in 1999 and niece in 2006. He now promotes the prevention of suicide for the strength of those left behind and to eradicate the cloud of stigma attached to suicide, depression, and mental health illnesses. His passion today is supporting suicide prevention and assisting survivors of suicide loss, SOSL San Diego. He truly wishes he knew of these services SOSL San Diego provides earlier in his postvention care. And Floyd, I'm with you on that. 11 years after I lost my own father to suicide, in a class project, I went to Survivors of Suicide Loss, a group. And I thought, why did I not go to this the first year?
Right.
You know, people understand. They're going through it too. They need us like we need them, you know? So again, Floyd, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here and welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, it is. It is one of those services that is necessary, but sometimes we don't hear about until too late. And it is a different grief. And I think everybody here that's been touched by it understands that to some degree. And because of that stigma around mental illness and around even saying the word suicide, we don't discuss it as much. We teach our kids very young. I know as an 8-year-old in Cub Scouts, remember learning first aid, learning how to take care of a snake bite, and yet we don't teach our children or others, period, unless they opt to go to one of these um, classes today that are more available about mental illness and about the signs of someone needing support for possible suicide. And I still don't understand why that the health industry hasn't moved further with that, but that's a whole nother conversation, because everything we do, whether it be the health insurance or the health industry itself, is affected by this stigma because there's not enough conversation around it. And that's one of my goals, is to talk about it any chance I get. Many people who have lost someone to suicide are, they still tell the story of, they lost their son to an accident or whatever, because they don't want that stigma around their family. I talk about some of these things I do with my mother, who, bless her heart, is 90 years old now. And she changes the subject. She still doesn't talk about the loss of my brother, all these years later. So it is a different loss, and I didn't grieve the loss of my brother as a loss by suicide until I lost my niece in 2006. The day I heard about the loss of my niece, I was actually in the admin waiting area at Mesa Vista, having my wife uh, admitted into the psychiatric ward under a 72-hour lockdown for trying to take her life. That was the same time I learned about my niece, and obviously that rocked my world that all of this was happening. Fortunately, with her there, when I left Mesa Vista that day, it was a lockdown facility. And as I went out the door, I heard that metal lock clink like a cell door. And I felt guilty because I felt relief. And it took me a while to reconcile what that was. And what that was the fact that I didn't have to be the one to worry about my wife that night. Somebody else, there was professionals taking care of her. And I could look at myself and start taking care of myself that I hadn't done for years. Just to cut to the chase on my wife, that's her date of sobriety. She has not taken a drink since that day. And we're still married to this day. Have 3 children and 11 grandchildren. One that turned 4 yesterday and kept me up until 6 this morning. But this discussion doesn't happen about these losses, and we do grieve differently. There's different things that go on. We wonder ourselves what we could have done. We get angry with the deceased, which we normally don't do in most griefs. There's all these different things that we go through because of it being a suicide, that if we're not with or go to these groups like we're alluding to, like the Survivors of Suicide Loss, which are peer support groups of others that have lost. Everybody there has lost someone to suicide, whether it be a mother, father, brother, sister, child, or friend. It affects you differently, and knowing that you're with others with those like grief, you hear these people going through these same things you went through, and you understand that you're not alone. You're not, crazy yourself, because you're thinking these different thoughts of grief that in your typical grief sessions they don't even discuss. And some won't broach it unless it is a suicide specific grief group. My brother he's my big brother. He was 3 years older. He was that guy that taught me to play basketball, play football, to ride a bike, all those things, And now all of a sudden he was gone. And like I said, I grieved the loss, but I didn't grieve the loss by suicide until later. And it was through me trying to fix myself. I realized I was in depression at that time. It scared the hell out of me. And I went and got help from the Navy, went to the doctor, and I'm still on medication today to help me control depression. In doing that, I then was looking at other ways of fixing the things that I hadn't done because I was just stuck in this rut of depression and not moving forward. Realizing that I was there was step one. Moving to get the medication, moving to find out what I could do to help myself out of this, to help myself get better, were those steps that got me to what I do today. And that was as I actually joined Toastmasters because I had missed a interview. But in Toastmasters, as I was coming up with speeches, my brother kept coming up. The topic of my brother kept coming up, and I took a course called "The Message of You." Judy Carter teaches as a speaker and a comedian, the message of you. What's your message to get out? And I found it was my brother, the story of my brother and how if we identify these things early, maybe we can, if we discuss them, maybe we can help that person. Maybe we'll see it sooner, which all mine was in retrospect. And a lot of people find that to be true because we don't talk about it enough. We're afraid to ask people if are you considering suicide? But we need to, because that's not going to push them further down. They will actually see that as a gesture that somebody might actually care about me being here. I'm afraid I got a little distracted and I may have rambled there. And does anybody have any specific questions or topic they want to talk about on it right at the moment?
I have a couple questions that I don't think that you rambled at all. Number one,
No, not at all.
And I have two questions. I'm gonna do the harder one first and the easier one second, if that's okay.
Okay.
So the first question is, a lot of times, especially with this last one and a few others, just so you guys, I keep his silver star and his purple heart on my desk. Literally, it's right here. Every business meeting I have, everything I do, it's right there with me. But we don't choose. I mean, a lot of times we choose a fast way, but for example, let me just say it this way. I don't even think they really consciously know that they're committing suicide sometimes. Like they'll literally drink themselves to death. And to watch somebody go through that and then clean up the horror show afterwards and realize they were peeing blood, but they just kept drinking. And then you think to yourself, I should have kicked that door in, or I should have, known that it was more than just he was drinking too much. He was actually literally trying to kill himself through alcohol, like, or drugs, or, I mean, we're trained to take a lot of pain. And it seems to me, with my experience of suicide of Marines and especially corpsmen and special forces, we don't choose easy ways out, even when it comes to suicide. And then that's the harder question. So, like, I guess, how do you even know? And then the second question is more toward the grief that you discussed about angry. Like, I still want to grab that bastard out of the sky and like punch him in the face and be like, dude, look at the great, like, today, it's ironic that we're having this discussion today, and I don't mean to take it off topic, but I think it will hit home. We literally made technological history about an hour ago, and he was part of this journey, and I want to like yank him out of the sky and be like, look what you're fucking missing, asshole. Like, we finally got here. And so that anger, like, I'm still, I don't care if we're recording, I'm fucking pissed at that dude. Like, I love him with all my heart. Like, that's why I showed you that I have his medals next to me all the time. I have his name tape up here on my wall. But anger so I guess the two things is the subconscious, like, or how do you know when a veteran's subconsciously doing it? And number two, how do you deal with that anger? Because it's been more than a year and I still want to, like, if he was alive, I'd knock his teeth out. Well, he'd probably, I don't know, he's a pretty tough dude. It would be one heck of a throwdown, but I'd try. So those would be the two questions that I have that you touched on. That's definitely unique, and I think in the veteran community, and Marines in particular, and corpsmen.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say that the subtle. Do they even know they're doing it? I think you probably do, and the reason I say that is because that's exactly what my wife was doing. It's interesting that you have that analogy. My wife was drinking herself to death and didn't want to stop, and even though things were failing, and she'd wake up in a pool of blood because she got out of bed, tried to get out of bed, and fell and hit her head on the corner of a table, and ends up with 10 stitches. But I wouldn't have known that had I not been awake enough to hear it. but that's kind of what I mean about the uh, first aid or the QPR. Question. Where you question someone, you actually looking for. You see the indicators, but we're afraid to ask. We're afraid it's going to hurt our friendship. We're afraid, they won't trust us. But they might be alive if we ask that question. Some are afraid to think that, well, if I ask them, I'll put suicide in their head. No, if they were contemplating suicide, it's already in their head. You aren't planting that. The reality is, and a lot of this information, this isn't Floyd Strayer as a doctor. This is Floyd Strayer reading a lot of the data that comes out that they analyze or have culminated together from people that have attempted and have survived, and as they talked to them and said, where were you at, why were you at this point, and had someone actually asked them, are you considering suicide, they would say they would see it as someone actually cared. But people won't sit and have that discussion. Those are things that's why I will speak about it anywhere. Is you got to have those open discussions. People need to get it. It's an illness, just as if someone got cancer, someone has depression, and they can't. If it's severe enough, they can't do it on their own. And if they're in that tunnel or that darkness without medication, and they won't go get help, and nobody will ask them, they'll never come out of it. They can't necessarily do it all. And you're right. We were taught, pull up your bootstraps, get through it, suck it up and go. Well, sometimes you can't without the aid of something else. Just metabolically, you can't.
Right.
There's many times if I don't get out of bed and take the medication, I'll stay in bed all day. It's a fact.
So then, what are your suggestions on the anger part? Because that is definitely specific to like to this day, I want to punch him. I do. Like, as much as I cared for my brother, like if I saw him again right now, the first thing I would do is a straight to the chin, and not 50%, like 100% Mike Tyson to the chin, because I'm so mad at him.
We do. We want to lash out at them, but you can't. I mean, how do you lash out at the
Well, a dead person, number one, right?
You're carrying this aggression within you, not doing anybody any good. What I found was in my writing to present to people, I found I was using the same stories over and over about my brother. So I sat down and started pulling out other stories, and I found it so enjoyable to just sit and write stories about my brother, the good times, journal. So I started journalizing them. And what really keyed it off to me was I was at home. My brother was in Ohio. That's where I grew up. And so all his kids are back there. And I was talking about my brother one day, and I saw all of them just intently watching and listening to every word I said. And I realized nobody talks about him to them. And they're just hungry to hear stories about their dad. And so I make it a point, anytime it aligns, to tell them a positive story, something fun, their dad and I did together, or funny or whatever, and those will change that for you. I think they did for me anyway, because I've got, like I said, 11 grandkids, and I saw he's got some the same age as mine. And I found myself angry one day, and I was like, what? Why am I so angry right now with them? And I was realized that we're supposed to be sitting here sharing stories with each other, um, and watching our grandkids grow up together, but he's not, and I had to deal with that. I had to think about it, and just come to terms. Okay, this is why I'm feeling this way. What do I do about it? Christmas, what was my best Christmas with my brother? What are some of those best memories? And I started journalizing. You know, we can tell them those things. You know, I have tell them those things. Damn it, you're supposed to freaking be here right now. But then you've told him, you know, as if as if he was sitting right in front of him, and try to let it go. And again, I've just, I can't express how much relief I've got from collecting these great stories about my brother, you know, and the more you think about times, you know, like, okay, I just took a time frame from 1 to 10. What were our Christmases like? You know, what did he do special, or what did he do to piss me off? You know, those type of things, and just write them down. And I found that to be just very, very therapeutic for me. And again, the work I do in as a speaker for SOSL, telling those stories, sharing those stories with others, that's my therapy and helping me move forward. And from that date on, I have accomplished so many things that I had wanted to do years before and never did. And every year I amaze my wife and myself in what I've accomplished in the next year, you know, not, not as a, you know, hey, look at me, this is what I can do. It's, hey, I've gotten off my ass and moved forward, you know, when I was just sitting around before and not taking part in the world, really.
You know, Floyd, if I can pop in right here, I first want to acknowledge the growth that I see in you. Like, it almost made me cry. I heard you share your story about, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And I see somebody who just your vulnerability, the stories that you're willing to share to help others heal,
Right.
is very touching. And I appreciate that. I also see how you have moved forward with your acting, with so many things that you're doing, you know, as outlets to just to take care of yourself and to thrive. And I think you're a great representation for survivors of suicide loss. And I'm really grateful that you're hitting this area of veterans. And I'd also like to share there, I mean, my mind was going so fast because of so many things that I can relate to. And I know that when my father passed in 2003, you know, taking his own life, one of the things that I was so grateful for is all the people that came forward to tell me how much they loved him with the stories and were willing to talk about it. Oof. And I also felt very grateful that even though I was not in survivors of suicide loss, I had friends that were willing to just listen, because you can start feeling a little crazy. Like it's like a feeling paranoid, kind of fear, anxiety, that if you've never lived with anxiety before, it's like, what is this new thing? Like, what is wrong with me? Like, I'm on 2 cylinders. You go through the motions and you're, you know, you go to sleep at night and all these feelings and senses are coming up, and you feel empty and depressed, and you don't know what to do with that if you're not in that, you know, when you've never kind of had therapy, or, you know what I mean? It's such a new arena for so many of us. And so again, I feel personally incredibly grateful, because I think my faith and my friends, even though they didn't understand because they had never been through it, at least they were willing to just be there. But having this added, you know, survivors of suicide loss, when I went there 11 years for a class project, 11 years later, just that feeling of, oh my gosh, yes, it all looked different, but we as loved ones totally got each other. Like, we got it. Floyd, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And does anybody else want to ask a question or have any thoughts?
I don't
Yeah,
want to be the
Sarah.
only one. I'm gonna shut up then, because
No, go ahead.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
John.
I want Scott Duncan's wisdom. I'll wait.
Okay. You know, John, as far as your feelings, I understand that. When my brother-in-law committed suicide, he had a 5-year-old son. He had a son who was just over, well, about 1.5 years. And then his wife was pregnant, and she was due a few months, prior to him committing suicide. And it was like, what the heck's going on? How did this happen? You have a beautiful wife, you have an amazing family. What's so bad that you took that route? And with him, he was battling depression. And the way I have come to peace with that is just thinking, for me, I can't imagine that. But it must be something that is so, overwhelmingly hard to rationalize and to deal with, the chemical process, the things that are going on inside of somebody's head, that if you don't have these issues, it's easy to, kind of write it off, or maybe to be mad. But once you realize that it's something, think about this, if someone's going to kill themselves, they're not in their right mind. There's just no way. And so that's how I kind of dealt with the anger. I still have, issues from time to time. I think about it, but something that was talked about a few minutes ago was talking and sharing stories about my brother-in-law to his sons, because they haven't had him, and they miss that relationship that you need to have with a father. It's not like he's divorced and you see him on the weekends, he's gone. And so they're very hungry for understanding, well, who is my father other than this guy that, committed suicide? He was a very strong man. He was a very faithful man. He was a good man. He just had, issues that he couldn't deal with. So the other thing, real quick, is how our society, it's interesting. It's a double-edged sword. You have people that are afraid to talk about suicide for the reasons that were brought up. You have people that once somebody does level with you and tell you they're having problems, sometimes they get ostracized. In the military, that's not uncommon. Now we got to worry about this guy, when we should be helping these folks, and we should be not making it such a traumatic, or making it a stigma. If folks need help, then that's absolutely what we need to do. We need to reach out. We need to figure out what help they need and get them to the right people and to the right facilities. That's something that we must do better. When you ask somebody what's going on and they tell you, and then you slap them in the face and tell them, hey, you got it. That's just not the way to do it. So, okay, yeah, I don't want to ramble on, but I hope that helps, John.
It does, Scott, and it actually raises a question for you and Floyd, if you guys don't mind me asking another question. And you know what? Even Tony, I don't want to shortchange the Army. In the Army, it's that it's the same way. But so I'm just going to give a quick story just to illustrate illustrate the example. Paris Island, a recruit while I was there attempted suicide and failed. He tried to hang himself. It's a long story, but he wound up hurting himself. And the drill instructor came out and said, I'm not going to say his name, recruit so-and-so, you want to be a Marine, you can't even kill yourself. And you're a freaking kid. You want to be a killer? You want to be a Marine? You can even kill yourself. And of course, all the recruits, we laughed. We were that brainwashed at that stage. You know, like if you tell that to a civilian, they would think, what the heck is going on in Barris Island? You know, but in Barris Island, drill instructor was proud that we laughed, you know, and the next morning that guy was gone, never saw him again. And so, like you just said, Scott, you know, Marines aren't military, we'll say. I don't want to go anywhere, but definitely Marines were taught to be killers, right? That's what are you? You're a killer, you know. You keep marching on. Like you don't stop and say, hey man, are you thinking about killing yourself? You say, hey man, you ready to go kill that asshole that we were just told to kill? You know, it's not put in our brains to so I had no idea that's what he was doing. You know, like I thought he was just partying too much. And you know, and to me, I was like, have fun, dude. You know, I didn't think I had no clue that he was, you know, like Floyd, you said that, you know, like you see signs, but sometimes you don't even see signs. Like when I would talk to him, he was excited about the work. He was excited about the next step. He was hard charging. He got everything done we ever needed to get done. And then, you know, the next thing you know, I mean, it wasn't weird for him not to disappear for 2 days. Like that was just his personality. He'd hook up with a girl, be gone for 2 days, and you hear back from him. And this time, you know, we didn't hear back from him. And then, so I guess the question is, it's a little bit different with us because, like you said, there's a stigma, right, in society. Like Floyd said, there's a stigmatism, and us as jarheads, we know from day one when, you know, what are we, you know, what makes the grass grow, and we have the highest suicide rate out of all the branches. You know, why? Like, why is that? Here we are supposed to be the best, and yet we can't protect our own brothers from taking their own lives. You know, I guess that's my I don't mean to leave an open question, you know, and your answer with another open question that I don't know if there's even an answer to.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, we're taught that it's a weakness. It's a freaking chemical imbalance, you know, but we're taught it's a weakness, so we're afraid to admit we're weak. You know, when we have those feelings of depression, when we have the, you know, whatever it might be, you know, with that darkness, if we see it as a weakness because that's what we've been told, when in fact I know now because I've seen the difference and realized the difference, that when without the meds, I could sit and just spiral out of control. You know, and people who are unfamiliar with mental health issues, you know, they see that and they see exit by suicide as a chicken shit way out. I mean, I've had coworkers actually say that to my face. And it can be difficult for those who've never experienced mental health illnesses to comprehend the mind of someone, you know, so deeply affected or afflicted. They don't see it as running from a problem. They see themselves sometimes as the problem. And then they begin to believe that the only hope for their family or their friends is to remove the problem from their family's life. They're the problem. They remove that problem from their family's life through suicide. Again, this isn't my analysis. This is coming from people that have attempted to take their life and fortunately were unsuccessful. I had that happen to me. I was brand new to VMGR 352 up at El Toro. I just transferred in. I was the avionics chief, and I didn't know everybody even in my shop yet. And I get a call from the maintenance officer. He says, "You got a guy in the hospital down there. He tried to slit his wrist. Go, you know, go make sure that chicken shit, you know, does what he needs to do for the doctors down, you know." And I'm like, what the hell, you know? This was before my brother had taken his, so I had very little background on the subject. But anyway, you know, that I'll never forget those words out of his mouth to me, you know. But we that all that stigma still is there. Let me give you a case point here. We call it committing suicide. You know where that comes from? It was actually against the law to take your life So he was committing a crime. So that is in everybody's mind when they hear that word, committed. They tried to take their life by suicide is a much more sensible approach because it doesn't put your mind in that mindset of they try to do something wrong. Well, yeah, it's not right, but it's not because they were trying to do something wrong. It's because they were trying to deal with something they didn't know how to deal with inside them. And until we get that discussion out, I have fortunately run across Marine COs invite me in to talk to their people because their command was breaking down into smaller groups because they were getting ready to change aircraft. And he was afraid that there was enough people there that had family members take their life. He was afraid they didn't have the support group that they needed. Very, very aware of his surroundings as his commanding officer. I was just in awe of this man at Miramar, and invited myself as well as behavioral health come in and talk to the group, let them know what resources were out there and stuff when they're dealing with the loss of suicide. And they didn't know that individually, that's why that we were called in there. But he had 3 people that were in that audience had lost family members. Nobody in his unit, but he was worried about them being supported enough to call us in and have that session. We need more of that, but there is a slow change, and change is always slow. But I think some of them are actually getting it and moving towards that.
Yeah, if I can,
sure.
From experience here, if I can add one more thing, is that at some point you need to move past this, right? You have to deal with the demons, for lack of a better word, that are, at your mind and soul. And it's hard to do, but you have to reconcile with that. And you can't take on the guilt. John, there was probably nothing that you could have done necessarily that may have made a difference with your friend. And you shouldn't, I hope you're not like second and third guessing yourself, because that's a dark road to go down. And I referenced when I was a battalion commander, I was on deck for about 30 days, and some things that were happening with this particular Marine. I brought my sergeant major in and said, hey, I noticed something about this Marine, and in my turnover with the previous commander and other folks, his name hasn't come up. What's going on with him? So we had a bit of a discussion with him, and I decided I would have him checked out with the folks, the Navy medical folks. And they came back and said, hey, this guy's got some issues. We're going to hold him here. And so they did. They held him for about 2 or 3 weeks. And, without getting into all the details, they felt that they had kind of done what they could do, and they wanted to release him back to us. And I said, I'm not, I wasn't comfortable with that, because staying engaged and following through while he was gone, kind of keeping a pulse with him and with folks in his family. But they felt otherwise, so they released him. And then I got a call from his mom, and she said, hey, because the family lived local, and they said he has guns, and we're afraid that he might do something with these guns. And so I said, hey, well, where are they? And she said, well, they're in his apartment, and I've got a key. What can we do? And so I decided to, I didn't really have the authority, but I did it anyhow. I tasked my folks to take the van, head over, take his weapons. We'll, lock him up in our armory. We'll get him a custody card. And I brought him in and explained to him, why we were doing this. And, he didn't like it, but it was a call that I thought was probably the right call. And, I told him, I said, hey, when these things work out and get better, you'll get everything back. They're not going anywhere. We're all Marines here. It's in the armory. And then things seem to be getting better. And then a few weeks later, I got a call about 10:30 in the evening, and it was my sergeant major, and he said, "Sir, I got some bad news." And he went on to explain that the Marine had gone out and bought a pistol, and that he took his own life in his apartment room. And that was tough, because you felt you did everything you could to help and to try to make things better and to take away things that you thought needed to be taken away. And so fast forwarding to the funeral, the Marine's dad was, I guess he's probably retired now, but he was on the local police force. And he said, "I would like to talk to you when you have time." And I said, "Sir, I'm ready to, I'm sure you do." So I said, "Whenever you're ready to come by, let's, I'll make myself available." So we put a time on the calendar, and he came by one morning. He had the late shift. He came by after a shift at 8 a.m, and I, had coffee ready for him. And we sat there and we talked for 6 hours. And I mean, it went by quick, but he needed someone to talk to. This is a long story, so I'll just condense it and say, you never know what's in the hearts and minds of people. You do your best. Sometimes you miss things. You can't control things. Things are beyond your control. And I know you loved your friend, and I didn't know this Marine much or all, but I loved him because he was a Marine, because that's what we do. We do our best to care for each other, but we also need to be able to at some point reconcile with yourself and let some of these feelings go, because you need that for yourself too. So.
God, thank you, man. I was one of the things that one of my the vice president of my company is a corpsman as well, and we both were good friends with him, and we go back and forth about those 2 days that he was kind of missing, and we thought he was out drinking, just having fun, and like we almost kicked his door in one day, and we didn't. Like we almost went over there, we almost kicked it in, and we were like, nah, we're gonna hear from him. And then now we're look back like, fuck, we should have kicked in the door, but you just told a story where you did kick in the door, and guess what? Once they have it in their head, it makes me feel better, brother. Thank you for sharing that. I know it wasn't an easy story for you to share, but it makes me feel better. It does. Hoorah, hoorah.
Right, do that, brother.
That's one of the reasons why I specifically say moving forward past an event. I don't call it moving on, because I don't move on without my brother. But I can't move forward in my life on a new road, and that I had to find a new road for me to go down, and it didn't happen overnight. It took me some time to get to that point, like you said. But I can move forward, and I have moved forward with my life, but never moved on without my brother. But I don't hold, like you said, I have let go of those animosities and turned them into, thinking about all the positives, and I continue to do that. And it takes a conscious effort, to continue to do that. Think about all those joyous times we had.
I think Chris has had his hand up for a while, and then Papa Ron. I'd love to get their questions in. Thanks, John and Scott.
So just for me, John and Scott, thank you so much for that insight. I've had lots of people in my life take their own life, and I've kind of resorted to treating it almost like first
Okay. Chris,
Go
we
ahead.
lost you for a minute. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, something that's worked for me, and maybe it can work for you, as I've had lots of people take their own lives in my life. It's kind of like combat casualty care and triaging. We can do an awful lot of things for people, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But if we do nothing, we know what the end result is, right? But if we do what we can and it still doesn't work out, it's just not meant to be. And that's how I've kind of handled that internally, is I've done everything that I can, and I can be at peace with that if I know in my heart that I've done everything that I can to try to help my fellow friends, soldiers, police officers, family members, whatever. Doesn't make that process easy, but it helps take some of the burden away, which doesn't allow me then to be angry because I've given everything that I can. And then I can put that energy into helping the kids and their families and so on. Scott and Mr. Strayer, I'd kind of like to ask you a question as far as the recognition and changing the stigma that we kind of talked about, because it's a legitimate dichotomy, right? Is we want to value our soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, our people, and we want to give them value. And that's part of the collective success of the military, is everybody finding this home, this family, this team. But the dichotomy is once you value them, but then they become, rather than an asset, institutionally, now that they've been vulnerable and said, hey, I need help, I've got some things going on, now they become a liability to some extent. How, from you guys' very senior perspectives, can we change that to embrace that, to say, hey, it's okay to admit this weakness without it completely overtaking them? I was a leadership instructor, I won't say where for now, and I had one of my students call me at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I'm standing in the ocean, I'm gonna kill myself. I need help. And I went out there, and the usual thing happens. We got him to the hospital, and the command's like, all right, we got to send this kid back home. And I fought for this kid. I said, if we send him back, this is going to cost him his promotion that's riding on this course. They may kick him out of the National Guard. There's going to be all these unintended consequences. And I was able to fight for him and keep him in the class, and he's a much better kid now. He's successfully completed the course. But how do you institutionally, do you think, or some of the steps that we can take to not normalize it, I don't think is the right term, but to destigma it to where it's okay? I've heard some of the, I think John McGaskill was one of them that said, hey, you know what, do we take some of these guys off the line, let them process these traumas after each mission, but then you take some of them out of the team? It's a really heinous dichotomy of trying to manage all that and still stay mission focused and mission ready.
No, so can I just interject real quick before either of you answer that? And to Chris's point, and just so I don't ask the same question a second time, it's exactly not only that, you guys are both officers, I believe, of the Marine Corps, so you know this to be true. If you take a guy out and you send him to the Navy to get checked out, you know when he gets back, we're busting his fucking balls. You know that, right? And he's gonna be, you know, every time, or she, I should say. I'm a little old school. I apologize. There weren't too many females when I was in the Corps. And if there were, they didn't let me see them. But that to Chris's point, exactly. How do you take that stigmatism out? Like if we know that he went Section 8 and all of a sudden he comes back, everybody's gonna be like, oh, that's the Marine that. Don't trust him with the hand grenade. You know, don't let him kick the door in first. I don't want him in my fighting hole. Like, and that's going to go around the whole company. It's going to go around the whole platoon, and it's going to go quick. So I'm going to shut up there, but just to back up Chris's question, it's a really good question, I think.
One of the things that the Navy Marine Corps has done, and I can only speak to that because that's who I work with on a regular basis, is they have what's called behavioral health, which is separate from the hospital. It is separate from medical. And they can go see behavioral health and it'll never be entered in their medical record unless they are severe enough that it needs to be. And it's a conversation then between the command leadership, and only the highest level of the command leadership and behavioral health have those discussions. It's not known through the whole command where they're at or what they're doing. That's a step. Is it, is it foolproof? No, but it is a step. The other part to that is I have a secret clearance with the Navy and I'm on medication. The guy that isn't on medication is the guy you got to worry about. And as leadership throughout the command, no matter what your level, you have to come to terms with that and get your people to understand that if they're asking for help, they're in a good state. It's when they don't ask for help that you really, really got to worry.
100%, 100%. He wasn't asking for help. We had no idea, right?
And probably because he was concerned with that. Recently, just this past year, I don't know whether you heard the number of deaths off of the Bush sitting in port over Norfolk. They had, I forget I'm not going to quote the number, but it was an astronomical number for one ship company to have the amount of suicides they had. And the one in particular struck me because his wife said that he would not go get help because he was afraid of losing his clearance and losing his job. That has to end. That
So
mentality.
what about, like, I mean, there's like CBD, there's lots of treatments that we talk about with this group a lot of times. And a lot of things like for example, CBD oil, if you use CBD, you can lose your clearance. Yet it's clinically proven to prevent people from having depression and having anxiety and having suicidal thoughts. I mean, there's scientific proof that it works, but yet if you take CBD, you lose your clearance. I mean, so what is the road? Is it activism? Is it, like, how do you change that? Like, how do you even make an effect to that?
That one's, you're right. That's a slow change that is, as more states, legalize it. The federal government.
Right, but I mean, it's the federal government's got to actually eventually say,
they will at one time, but you're right. That's a slow change though, until more states actually do it and put the pressure on, say, look, what, but that's just one element or one, I've heard a lot of positive things about it too. I concur with you, but I can't use it yet,
Right. Well, what you just said too about that, not even just losing clearance, but also like what I said is you lose rep, right? You lose rep amongst your fellow Marines. Like, I'm not sure if I want him behind me to, like, he's got to keep me a fuck alive, and if he wants to kill himself, how do I know he's going to keep me alive? And I'm not trying to be, as Marines, I'm not trying to be lighthearted about it. It's the truth. That's exactly what's going through the other Marine's head.
No,
a lot of times people say, "Oh, the guy that won the the Medal of Honor." They read you the citation about him being jumped on the hand grenade. When you become a Marine, you learn real quick. He was the schmuckatelli. It was tossed on the hand grenade, so the rest of the guys didn't die.
Hey, John.
Go ahead. I'm gonna,
no worries. From my perspective, this is all about leadership, right? It's command, setting the command climate. And if you have a Marine or sailor that's injured, they've hurt their knee, and they're hardhead, they keep working out, they keep running, they don't go to see the doctor to get diagnosed and to understand what they have to do to get their knee healthy so they can stay in the military and function at the required level they need to function at to stay in and be a productive part of the team. It's the same thing. Identifying, what the issues are. And then with this particular issue, as leaders, we need to, talk about this, right? Not, like was mentioned earlier, not be afraid to talk about this. And not that it's a normalization of it, but it's kind of identifying the same principle compared to a physical injury by a psychological or maybe a mental thing. in small group discussions. You know, that guy is your brother. That gal is your sister. If something's, you know, if they're having an issue, we need to be helping. We need to be understanding. We need to pull them in, not push them away. That's just not the way we do things in the military. It shouldn't be, right? And to me, that's something that's a leadership issue. It's something that you have to make a point to talk to your folks about that. It doesn't have to be every day, 24/7, but it should be on the training plan. It should be something you discuss with them. And when things happen, then within their mind, they already have a mindset of, oh, that's right, we were talking about this, right? So
it's
I
just
know-
like getting tendonitis or spraining your ankle. You get to the point where it's normal, right? You get to the point where it's like, hey,
keep going. Yeah.
right. Yeah. To change your socks, right, Scott? Change your socks, drink some water. But
Right.
I get your point. You try to make it more of so people realize it's not a, you know, it's not a threat to you. You know, it's just as much a threat to have a bad knee to the platoon, right?
Right.
I mean, what if that knee gives out during a mission, and now you
Right.
now you jeopardize everybody else?
Well, right. In the Army is, I just saw this on LinkedIn. The Army is considering giving, you know, enlisted warrant officer, commissioned officers up to 3 years off. You know, if we're willing to give folks time to go back and get an education, or to maybe, you know, find themselves, you know, whatever the reasons are that they're going to do this, if we're going to allow them to walk away from service for up to 3 years, now there's a commitment if they do that, you know, that it winds up adding more time on the back end for them. But if we're going to do that so that folks can, you know, better themselves with a degree, you know, we need to be thinking about how we're going to address these issues and take care of folks that need assistance and not stigmatize them. You know, I guarantee you, everyone here knows people that are taking medications, or knows folks that probably should. You know, so it's the way things are. So we need to accept that and move on. Some folks, you need to maybe watch a little more than others, but other folks, they get their medications and they're okay. So yeah, we need to figure that out, because we're doing a disservice to many people.
So then my question is, we're not in the military anymore, right? Now we're civilians. Now we're leaders of men that aren't, and women that are not always military. And I'm gonna keep this was great. Scott and Floyd, this was pure gold. You guys have helped some serious pain, and also you've enlightened me to make sure going forward that my company pays very close attention to mental health for my employees, veterans and the civilians that are under my I didn't choose to be the CEO of this company. It was kind of given to me, and so I'm going to take this to heart and make sure that we enforce this, you know, amongst everybody in the team. We keep a good eye on everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you, brothers.
Just real quick to let you know another change that I've seen, because change is slow, like we said, and especially in the military. You know, a lot of customs and courtesies that will be there forever. Active duty major who attempted to take his life twice, still on active duty, speaking at my group at Miramar.
So I have a question.
Years ago, that was unheard of.
Yeah, if you get VD more than twice, when I'm in my day, if you got VD number 3, you were out. They gave you 2 times. The corpsman diagnosed you with VD for a 3rd time. That was it.
Yeah, I want to, can I just pop in? Ron, I know you've been waiting a long time too to ask a question. You guys, thanks so much for the conversation. All of it has been really interesting. Ron, what were you wanting to ask?
Well, so one of the things is there's not anything terribly unique about depression and mental illness and reduced readiness. These are all very, very, and the only way you can destigmatize it is to just really talk. I mean, really open it up that a person can. I know that on submarines, I mean, uh, we were responsible. I was responsible for breaking people around me because I knew if I couldn't break them, I could probably depend on them when I needed them, you know, and we rode each other hard. I mean, Johnny talked about that. I mean, we had some of ours go off in an I love me jacket because they just completely wigged out. And, but there is, as someone who pretty much daily has to talk myself out of bed and out of the cave to start my day, um, and having pretty much daily thoughts of suicide, I'm not undependable because I have thoughts. I'm undependable when I stop navigating through that. And if a person is navigating through those things, they actually become stronger because they have resilience even beyond themselves. And when someone ends their life with suicide, a person thinks they're ending their pain, but they're not. They're just passing it off to the people who say, I love you and really care about them. That pain doesn't go away. It does for that person. I learned a long time ago, there's no such thing as a successful suicide. There's a completed suicide. There's a suicide attempt that was not completed with end of life. We've got to really talk about things in circles where we're not afraid. The liability should be if I don't take this person back. You know, there's where the liability is. If we don't take them back, if I know somebody has troubles and I don't take them back, I am liable for what may happen going forward. And we're not assuming that liability. So the liability, again, like the pain for the person who has suicidal ideations, the liability doesn't end. It just gets transferred off. We used to have a thing called the lemon dance. You just write them a good set of evals and pass them off to the next ship, you know? And so we're not ending the liability. We're just handing it off. And I think that's leadership malpractice. And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I started part of the conversation earlier about that, maybe before you got on, that absolutely we have to have that conversation. We have to keep that conversation going. And that's one of the reasons why I speak, and I'll speak anywhere about the loss of my brother to suicide, because until society as a whole embraces it as another illness that needs to be treated. Why do I pay a higher copay to go see a psychiatrist than I do to go see orthopedic? Why is my copay higher?
My brain can break, my arm can break. What's the difference? And brains get damaged.
Yeah.
And brains get damaged a little more, sometimes almost more complexly than do our bones and tendons.
So I have a question for Floyd, Duncan, and Papa Ron. I have a question for all three of you. So, and we've been talking a lot about the people that are committing suicide, but this is supposed to be a talk about us who have survived, right? And I'm not saying that we did it on purpose. Maybe we subconsciously dodged that bullet, and because it's hard to talk about, because a lot of times you feel like you're the monster because you're the one that's still alive, right? You feel like you're the monster because you want to dig him out of the grave and kick the shit out of him for killing himself. Sometimes you feel like you're the monster because you didn't stop him, right? And I mean, I'm not suicidal at all. I've got 3 beautiful kids. I've never,
Johnny, let me hold you back
but I
here
do
a second.
feel like a monster for not letting
Can I hold
letting
you off, Johnny?
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
nothing.
Sure.
There's nothing unusual or unique about that. that is absolutely normal to say. I mean, when people are second guessing, you want people to do an after action review and second guess their actions. Okay. I mean, that's part and parcel of any readiness and after action report. What did we do right? What could we have done differently? How can we move into this? And we need to second guess ourselves. I mean, and having friends who have ended their life, it's like, what did I miss? I had a guy come into my office and just chipper and cheerful, and just come, hey, I just came by to say hi. That night, he slammed a mother load of heroin, and he knew what it would take to do the job, you know? And we were all saying, wow, how did we miss that? It's almost when things are going right and quiet, that's the danger. And we think quiet is good. Quiet is the enemy sneaking in, you know.
That's exactly what Floyd said.
Only predators are quiet, you know. Non-predators are noisy, you know. And so when it gets quiet, that's when we need to be concerned. And yes, we do need to second guess ourselves, because I might have missed something. I might have done something that, or not done something by omission or commission. And when somebody ends their life through suicide, we do need to dig deep into that and find out where it got missed. And we don't do that. I mean, we don't even as a country have a uniform way of finding out if someone was a veteran when they complete a suicide and all of their family members are suffering. I mean, we're imposing huge pain by not following through on those who've lost their loved one. I mean, this is about the survivors. You know, anyone who knows someone who ended their life through suicide, they're a survivor, and they're going to be, well, what did I miss? Oh, I could just gaff it off, you know. And this is one of those things, we can't gaff it off, or I'm complicit if I do. So we're the ones that are committing, not an act. If you want to talk about committing an act of atrocity, the people who are not running through this drill are the ones that are committing, not the person that ended their life through suicide.
I'd like to add to that. I absolutely agree about the need for after action, right? That's, if you're in the military, you understand after action reports, and hopefully folks, you know, lessons learned, you know, take those off the shelf here so that they can, you know, read them and not commit the same, you know, mistakes moving forward. But the difference that I'll draw here is second and triple guessing yourself to, you know, figure things out. I get that, but you have to move past thinking that, you know, it's my fault, because you're not the one that committed suicide. It's the person, for whatever reason, they took their lives, and it's not your fault. It's something that they did. So, you know, there's a difference. And I just want to make sure that that's something that, and we can disagree on this, obviously, right? But I just don't want folks, unless you were just, you know, absolutely were involved in encouraging somebody, you know, that's kind of crazy. But there's a big difference between maybe not understanding what you're looking at, or you're doing things and you're busy and, you know, you're involved in your work, and maybe you feel, well, I should have given that person more time. Yeah, well, you know, you can double, triple, quadruple guess that. So there's a difference between going back and relooking issues and taking responsibility for someone's suicide. So I kind of want to make sure we keep that separate.
That's part of
and
grief,
I understand it. I understand integrity. On submarines, we define integrity, or a lack of integrity, that anything that reduces the submarine's ability to carry out its mission. I get command mission, command objectives. I really do. I'm talking about what happens once something does come up, the liability there. I mean, we have to keep that boat from going down farther than it went intended. We, you know, it's one of those things. but the liability is, why is it a liability to take care of someone? You know, we wouldn't leave a broken, injured, ill member on the field. We need to bring them back and get them the care they need. And
Absolutely.
if depression and those symptoms are there, that's the after action I'm talking about. If somebody breaks down, I mean, if someone has a psychotic break in the field or in an action, we need to come back and deal with that and not treat them as a disposable that they just have to be thrown away.
It seems like I think that's what I'm hearing too, is that, you know, we were not the one that took somebody else's life. It was, but to be able to take these horrible things that we've gone through and just learn. And now we know more. And now we can be even more helpful going forward. And like, that's what I would think, you know, if like Scott, what you were saying is sometimes we don't know what we're seeing. You know, if we're not equipped in that way. And these conversations are so good because then now we can go forward understanding more and maybe help somebody else. But I don't think that's the point. We are going to second guess, you know, if we have any empathy or any love for somebody, well, of course we're going to second guess, or we're going to think, gosh, what coulda, shoulda, whatever. But I think the healing part is to know that, you know what, it wasn't our fault. But there are things that we can learn to move forward and maybe be part of the solution for other people.
The problem with suicide is we second guess alone. We're afraid to voice it. If we had lost a child to an auto accident, you know, we would speak about it openly. You know, and it's, people fear what they don't understand, and bringing these subjects to light is one of the most positive things we can do in the prevention of suicide. You know, people with disorders having feeling of isolation, shame, despair, you know, they're afraid to talk about it. This open dialogue helps us remove that stigma in society about suicide, and it will affect everyone involved. Sorry.
Well,
it's about it for years.
It's also
People.
like the parent of an addict thinking, can't talk about it to the neighbors because they're going to think, oh, you've missed something. Your child ended up that way because of something you did or didn't. We pass those stigmas on all the time. I know someone who their sister completed suicide on that person's birthday. That person's birthday is destroyed forever. I mean, and not understanding that, but has to be able to talk about that. I just, you know, I woke up, it's my birthday, and my sister ended her life on that day. If she would have done it the day before or the day after, you know, and thinking that's better, but it's not. It's just the same thing. There's shame about being related to someone who ended their life through suicide. Like, you know, you must have a horrible family that wasn't paying attention. So anyways, that's that about that.
I think that's a good point. I felt I didn't know people who had taken their lives. Really, it was never very familiar. And I'd have to go to, you know, baseball games, and it's like, I have no idea what to do with this. And I certainly was not going to tell people except for my close friends. Like, there's no way I was going to.
People must be looking at me funny. You know, everybody that sideways glance, they, you know, they just think I'm, you know, I mean, think of the parents of that. I mean, the siblings, and that is like, oh my goodness. It's like people walk around with that pain and shame in an incredible way. And unless we talk about it openly, and we're never going to get past that. Yeah. You know, it is horribly tragic when someone ends their own life. That's a tragedy. And people ought to be able to talk about tragedy in a way that doesn't bring shame upon their entire life, you know.
On top of that, piggybacking on that, and this is what I learned from survivors of suicide loss, probably Floyd, is the first 6 months that we have survived a suicide loss is a very vulnerable time for suicide. I have not personally struggled with that, but it concerns me for people that are not talking to people and who have just survived a suicide loss. That if people are not safe to be able to have these conversations, think about the trauma and the rewiring and the trajectory of so many people that have had to try to figure this out on their own.
You mentioned early on that you had friends that would just listen.
Yeah,
And that's what people don't have usually
I
when
know.
it comes to this is, and that's what's great about SOSL groups is there other people that know what you're going through and are willing to listen, not, pass judgment or say, oh, well, I know what you're feeling when you know damn well they don't, you know? And that's one of the best things we can do in supporting others that have that loss is to just listen, be there for them, let them, talk through what it is that they're going through. Because even if you've had a loss, that doesn't mean you know what they're feeling, but you can listen to them and let them explain it. And we're afraid to do that as a society. We're afraid to get involved into a conversation with someone who has lost someone to suicide because we don't know what to say, because we haven't been trained like we have been trained to treat a snake bite at 8 years old, but we haven't been trained to listen to someone who has a mental struggle. And you're right, postvention care, that's what we're talking about when we talk about survivors of suicide loss, is that is some of the most detrimental time, can be detrimental time to someone, is that first 6 months trying to come to terms with it. And that's why these groups are so great, to have others to come, be able to, that that they have gone through this, they're willing to listen to what you're going through and have some understanding to it rather than trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, and Sarah, to
Uh-huh.
that, I mean, we did something here, like with our national cemetery. So imagine what it's like to lose a veteran to suicide, and now you're there with an honorable ceremony and all of that kind of stuff. And so the director of the cemetery says we need to have some places to refer people to, because they need to have information. Because all of the first Christmas, the first birthday, the first Valentine's Day, the first of everything, all of those are tremendously, those are reminiscent points. That first 6 months is true. The first year is true too. So, but the survivors are going to deal with that. If they make it through the first year without, there's likelihood they'll make it through the second year, but and start to improve. But that first year is a tough one.
Yeah, so true. Gosh, it's just huge and surreal, as we all know in this group. Tony, I want to make sure that you get your question in. You had a good question about how to say it, suicide loss.
Yeah. So, it's, I think there's a few stigmas that we kind of fight. And, one of the stigmas of talking about it, we've kind of, has been, very prominent in the conversation. But there's other stigmas of people thinking that, I'm not going to get really visualized in that memorial state until I'm gone, so there was a few years ago to where it almost seemed like, suicide was a trend. That was the only way that I could get noticed. That was the only way that people could finally see, what was happening. So trying to fight that stigma as well. But then the other one, the last one, is wrapped around the question is, that, and we talked about it a little bit, is that, that security clearance, so that high profile, piece of, we have sabbaticals, at high level positions of any kind of company whatsoever, for something, religious, or for something, outside of doing some other good work. But to be able to kind of come back and say, this is something I'm going through right away, it does become like that career death move almost. And one of the stories that I valued the most, from the Army side, was a sergeant major that was going to counseling every 2 weeks, twice a month, he was going to counseling. And he made it public, he did not hide it. He went in uniform. He didn't take the back door. He went to counseling, and it wasn't until the counselor herself was about to, discharge him and say, you don't need this. We come in here and we talk about the day, we talk about, how your family's doing, everything's great. We talk about all this stuff. And like, she's like, I don't see a problem. I'm actually going to discharge you. It wasn't until then that he admitted, like, I don't come here for me. I come here because I want my troops to see me walk through that door, and he wasn't making that, public at first, because he didn't want it to, seem like that was just the brush over or whatever. He was making a leadership statement of saying, here I am at the highest level of being a command sergeant major of brigade, division, whatever, and that I'm going to seek counseling. And he said, since then, I've had a lot of my guys who have, improved performance, been there to have gone through that healing process or whatnot, because the leader was able to do that. So how do we sort of create, say, our own trend in a way to say that, these high level directors or CEOs or CFOs or whatever else, labels we always put on our emails, are okay sometimes taking those sabbaticals, or okay sometimes saying, like, I went through suicidal thoughts, a year or two ago, and this is how I healed from it. So that way it becomes more apt to somebody not falling into that, because it is an isolation. It's an isolation of them feeling like they're dealing with something alone. It's an isolation of them feeling like they have no support. It's an isolation of them feeling scared that if they admit something, that they're going to be ridiculed versus supported, so that just being able to open up and admit that, like you said, committing suicide comes from the fact of me thinking that I'm doing something wrong, or that it's a crime. Well, now it's more along the lines of I'm committing the cardinal sin of admitting that I might be suicidal, because then that's going to be the next crime. I'm going to be ridiculed or punished in some way, shape, or form of really just kind of admitting it or saying it. And the more I hold it in, the more everybody below me is going to see that as being, that's what you do. That's the thing that you fall into. So rather than falling into a trend of saying, I won't be memorialized or understood or supported until I'm already gone, is growing a trend more so of, somebody out there saying, I had suicidal thoughts, or I still have suicidal thoughts, and this is what I'm doing about it. So that it becomes a trend for others to say, well, damn, this guy is, doing amazing things, and found the support and found the thing of what it is. So why is it that I can't do the same,
Modeling. Yeah. Listen, I have just really appreciated this conversation. Bye, Ron. Really good to see you. I promised Floyd we'd have a hard cutoff at 12:30. Tony, thank you so much for that. It's so, gosh, if we could have more models, right? People modeling what healthy behavior of getting the help that
Right.
you need. Gosh, so much great sharing. I really appreciate all of you.
I'm glad you were on today. I don't go to the grocery store because I'm starving. I go to the grocery store to prevent me from starving. I don't go to the gas station because I'm out of gas. I go to the gas station to keep me from running out of gas. I don't go to the gym. Well, I don't go to the gym that much anyway, but you don't go to the gym because you're weak. You go to the gym to stay strong. It's almost like you ought to be going to a counselor and a therapist all the time, all the time, not just because you're broken. It's to make sure you stay unbroken.
Love that. Thank you so much, all of you. Floyd, thank you so much. This was such a powerful conversation. And the ripple effect is not just staying with this 1 hour and a half. It's going to be seen for others. So thanks again.